Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I know there is a ton of news to cover and few people covering it, so we appreciate you being here on this important issue for us. Today is really a statement on what we can do when we work together, and everyone up here has worked together on what we're going to talk about today. So let me introduce everyone first. Right here is Jim Barnacle. He's the acting special agent in charge here in Charlotte for the FBI. Was very helpful in these investigations, and thank you, Jim, for that. Alan Wilson, the Attorney General of South Carolina, and we'll talk a little bit about the interplay between North Carolina and South Carolina, but thank you for making the trip, Alan. Jeff Jackson, who's frequently here, and we appreciate you coming down today, Jeff, on this. Richard Gaskins, the acting special agent in charge for the IRS criminal investigations, and Kelly Blackman, special agent in charge for the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General, which played an obvious major role here. These folks represent partnerships at every level. Federal and state, across multiple agencies, Republican and Democrat. We're all here with one goal, and that is to eradicate healthcare fraud. You know, each year the United States spends $5 trillion on healthcare. Now, for those of you who are following the wedding this past weekend, that's more than 20 Jeff Bezoses that we spend on healthcare. 45% of that spending is Medicare and Medicaid. So $2.25 trillion comes from government sources. And when criminals steal from those programs, they're stealing from all of us. And I don't mean all of us just as taxpayers, which of course they do steal from all of us as taxpayers, but this is healthcare. This is literally a matter of life and death, and it affects the most vulnerable among us. It affects children, disabled people, pregnant women, the elderly, and others. And the Attorney General has made healthcare fraud a priority for the administration, and it's certainly a priority here for my office. But we are not taking that fight alone. As you can see by the folks up here with me, we're all working on this together. So I'm going to talk about a couple cases that we're highlighting today and then turn it over to these folks who did the investigative work and the work on the ground and know a little bit more about those cases. So the first is a federal case that was brought to the attention of federal authorities by the Attorney General of South Carolina, Attorney General Wilson. I really appreciate that, Alan. And I know what you're thinking. Why is the Western District of North Carolina interplaying with the South Carolina Attorney General's office? Well, this was a case where providers in North Carolina were making false claims to Medicaid in South Carolina. And they were making those false claims and saying they were providing services that were never provided. Just fictitious services, classic fraud on your taxpayer money. You have a handout, I think, but I'll name their names for you just so you have it. The first are there's 8 co-conspirators. 7 are charged by indictment. That's Donald Saunders of Charlotte, Vanessa Boatwright of Manning, South Carolina, Latarsa Hitchcock of Jacksonville, North Carolina, DeJuan Strickland of Charlotte, Cynthia Harris of Elgin, South Carolina, Stephanie Corbett of Jonesboro, Georgia, and Karen McClary of Kingstree, South Carolina. Some of them have additional charges as well, whether that's money laundering or stealing beneficiaries' numbers that were used to make the claims. All of those, Latarsa Hitchcock has already had her appearance in court. The rest will have their appearance in the coming days in the federal courthouse a block from here. The 8th, David Corey Hill, was charged by a separate information, and the reason for that is because he's already agreed to plead guilty in the case, and so he will be entering his guilty plea at the courthouse in the coming days this week as well. And Attorney General Wilson and Special Agent in Charge Barnacle will provide some more additional details about that very important case, but I do want to emphasize how thankful we are to the South Carolina Attorney General's office and the South Carolina investigators who led that case and uncovered that scheme through a very lengthy and complex investigation. The next case was brought to us by the North Carolina Attorney General, Jeff Jackson, who we work very closely with very often, and that's the Crystal Sherelle Jackson case. Ms. Jackson held herself out as a clinical addiction specialist. She also had a purported mental health agency and a clinical laboratory, and she charged with billing North Carolina Medicaid over $1.9 million in psychotherapy and drug testing services that either weren't necessary or were just never provided at all. What's particularly egregious about her conduct is the beneficiaries whose Medicaid numbers she used never knew they were being used. Many of those beneficiaries were dead, some of them were incarcerated, and some of those beneficiaries could have gone to get necessary services and found they had already capped out from Medicaid because they had been fraudulently used by Ms. Jackson, according to our allegations. So she has agreed to plead guilty and will be pleading guilty in the upcoming days at the federal courthouse. Our work is obviously far from over in this case, and our work is not limited to these criminal cases. We use our civil division where there are people who have misused Medicaid or Medicare money but maybe don't rise to the criminal levels. We will sue them to get the money back. We will recover taxpayer money using every tool we have. And I think I speak on all of us up here when I say a message to those out there who are thinking about engaging in similar actions. If you engage or if you exploit our Medicare and Medicaid programs, we will find the red flags, we will trace the money, we will uncover your scheme, and we will bring you to justice. So I want to turn it over, and I want to thank our federal counterparts as well. And of course, HHS and the IRS had a tremendous role in investigating these. And I'll turn it over to Special Agent in Charge Barnacle to speak a little bit more about the investigation in these cases. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, U.S. Attorney Ferguson, for hosting this event to highlight our collective efforts to combat healthcare fraud. Healthcare fraud isn't just a crime that exists on paper. It harms the public and drains critical taxpayer-funded government programs. These schemes also steal from vulnerable people and from families that rely on these programs to access medical care and other services they need. The FBI is proud to be here as part of an ongoing partnership and a strong team of state and federal partners who have played a critical role in each investigation we're announcing today. In these two cases combined, the joint investigations uncovered over $22 million in fraud. Together, these investigative agencies found Medicaid payments disguised as consulting contracts and payroll payments. As alleged, Medicaid information of children and other vulnerable people in our community was taken and used for someone's profit. This is appalling conduct. These businesses claimed to offer behavioral health services and did very little, if anything, to help others. I want to highlight a few of the names of the companies that are alleged in the indictment. Helping Hands, Next Steps, Strickland Cares, and Bank Resources. Let that sink in. Names that will tell the public they're there to help you, but in reality, there was no services provided. Money was just taken from our government agencies. How we fight healthcare fraud. To detect and combat healthcare fraud, the FBI uses every tool available. We use data analytics to look at Medicare and Medicaid billing. We use the same investigative techniques we've used in over 100 years of fighting crime. We leverage our data scientists and data analysts. We use forensic accountants. Forensic accountants play a huge role in fighting healthcare fraud cases. They look at the flow of money, the flow of funds in the Medicare billing, and make our cases for us. As always, the FBI relies on strong partnerships. There is nothing we can do without the help of other agencies. We are proud to stand behind the Attorney Generals of the great states of North Carolina and South Carolina, IRS CI, the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina, along with every agent, investigator, analyst, and prosecutor that had a hand in this case. I also want to recognize HHS OIG and SAC Blackman. The FBI works with HHS across the country. The FBI has over 440 agents that work healthcare fraud full-time across the United States. Nearly every single investigation we have, HHS OIG is a partner on those investigations. I can't thank you enough for the relationship we have here in the Carolinas. All agencies at every level of government working together is how we mitigate these fraud schemes that are draining programs of critical taxpayer dollars. Each agency brings their own strengths, their own resources and expertise for common goals to protect public funds and bring criminals to justice. As someone who has led healthcare fraud cases at the national level, and today the Department of Justice will be announcing a national coordinated takedowns across the entire United States, and these two cases are part of that coordinated takedown. I can say without hesitation that this is a model of how state and federal agencies should work together to build investigations, bring offenders to justice, and protect public funds. These investigations as U.S. Attorney Ferguson has already said, are ongoing. A lot more work will be done by the prosecutorial agencies, and we will assist them as these cases are brought to justice. I appreciate your time, and I'd like to turn it over to the Attorney General of South Carolina, Mr. Alan Wilson. Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you, Agent Barnacle. U.S. Attorney Ferguson, thank you for hosting this event. And General Jackson, it's great to be back with you in Charlotte. It's been about a month since we did another press conference together, and enjoy that collaborative relationship we have. And I want to thank our federal partners for being here today, everyone. The component of this involving South Carolina was called Operation Border War, which is an investigation of behavioral health providers, approximately 50 companies based in or near Charlotte, North Carolina, who systematically defrauded the Medicaid program of South Carolina of over $21 million. Let me say that again. Defrauded South Carolina's Medicaid program with over $21 million between the years of 2017 and 2024. This investigation was titled Operation Border War because the defendants took advantage of a rule that the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services had in place, which allows Medicaid providers to enroll companies located within 25 miles of South Carolina. So obviously that would bleed over into North Carolina. And they took advantage of that 25-mile exemption to be able to help create this fraudulent scheme. In 2020, members of my Vulnerable Adults and Medicaid Provider Fraud Unit worked with the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to begin to identify the targets and the companies and the scheme being implemented that plagued South Carolina's Medicaid program. Particularly, this was built around behavioral health programs that exploited our citizens for years. We then, after understanding the cross-border nature of this, started partnering with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and our other federal partners who are standing up here with us today. This is an example of our office's ability to go after tens of millions of dollars that were being defrauded against South Carolina beneficiaries. And just to give you a little bit of what was going on, what 8 co-conspirators basically would do is that they would go and they would create fictitious companies or straw companies. They would go to the Secretary of State's office. They would incorporate. You heard some of the names that Agent Barnacle just talked about, but they would just create a company. And then they would go and they would find legitimate, actual, real licensed professional counselors, and they would meet with those licensed professional counselors and say, hey, we have a company, Helping Hands, or whatever the name of it was. We would like for you to come provide services to Medicaid beneficiaries, fill out this application. From that application, they would be able to get a lot of the personal identifiable information of these LPCs or licensed professional counselors. They already had their national provider ID number, and they would use that information. Once they met with the licensed professional counselor, they would then enroll them up into the company and then apply through the South Carolina Medicaid program, giving that straw company the imprimatur of being an official mental health service provider. Most of the LPCs, or licensed professional counselors, were duped. They were unknowing. There were a couple who actually were complicit in this scheme, but the vast majority of them did not know this. Then, once they had the company set up, and once they had stolen the information from the counselors, the Medicaid providers, and had them into the company and enrolled in the program, they would then start filing fraudulent claims against Medicaid beneficiaries in South Carolina. Now, what's interesting about these Medicaid beneficiaries is that the majority, nearly all of these were severely disabled children, children who were quadriplegic or nonverbal or autistic or had some other mental health issue that was significant or severe. And they would start billing for services that these minor, severely disabled children never received. And that was basically the scheme that was rolled up, and that is what they did. They would even, and this is really was insidious, they would diagnose these children, okay, and then put notes into their file that they were filing against. Like, for instance, by way of example, on a child who was a quadriplegic, they were saying this child was being disruptive and running around the classroom or yelling things when the child was nonverbal, and diagnosing them and putting these notes into their official files and then filing those, basically violating those children's and those families' privacy. in addition to the scheme, they were able to get, some of these co-conspirators were able to get access to the Medicaid beneficiaries, the children's information, legally because of where they had formerly worked. We had one of the co-conspirators was a former professor of social work at the University of South Carolina at Limestone, I believe. And then another former employee was worked for a case management company, and another one worked for the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice. So they would obtain the Medicaid provider's information in a physical meeting, and then they would get the beneficiaries' information through legal means that these co-conspirators had access to. Whenever one of these fake companies that was fraudulent billing against the Medicaid system in South Carolina would get flagged for excessive or abusive billing practices, they would then rinse and repeat this entire scheme again. They would create another company. They would go find new beneficiaries, or they would go find new counselors, or just transfer the counselors over to the new company, and then they would replicate that scheme all over again. That's why you have such a large number. And they were billing on behalf of these children and misdiagnosing them, which to me was just a horrible thing for them to do. Now, one of the law enforcement techniques that was implemented by members of our team, which I thought was ingenious, is that they created a bunch of fake beneficiary accounts. And working with our federal partners and our friends up here in the Charlotte area, we basically populated the scheme using confidential informants to populate these fake beneficiary numbers, and that way we were able to follow the fraud, because whenever that beneficiary claim would be filed, we knew that was a fake kid. That beneficiary did not actually exist. So it was really kind of ingenious. What I want to say, and I'm going to recognize some of the members of our team here in just a second, but what I want the people who are perpetrating this to know, allegedly perpetrating this to know, and what I want anyone else out there doing this to know, is that if you commit this kind of conduct, you're potentially destroying lives, and as was said just a moment ago, you're diverting incredibly important resources away from the people who need it the most, and you're basically punishing the taxpayer, and you're punishing the families, and you're punishing these children, and that is something we can't abide. So we are going to come after you, and we are going to find you, just as the U.S. Attorney said, and you will be prosecuted. And I also want to say this: everyone in this case right now, these are all allegations at this point, and everyone is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. And they should enjoy that presumption of innocence. But for those out there who are conducting these types of alleged conduct, we will find you and we will get you. I want to thank the Vulnerable Adult Medicaid Provider Fraud Unit folks that are with me today. We had a lot of people, and I'm not going to read every name, but I do want to call out Jamie Seals, who was our lead investigator sitting up here on the front row, who literally lived in this case for the last 4 or 5 years. I also want to thank Senior Assistant Deputy Attorney General Stephanie Opit and Chief Investigator John Frampton for their contributions. We also had Chief Auditor Lisa Collins, Assistant Attorney General Emily Claybar, who were assisting. And I could start going down the list of everyone in our office, but it is the men and women in the Attorney General's office working with the men and women of the FBI, HSI, OIG, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's office here in North Carolina, and other partners, that if it wasn't us working together collaboratively, that we would not have been able to bust open this scheme and hold these individuals accountable. So it was an honor for me to be here today. Again, if you continue to abuse mentally disabled children by defrauding the Medicaid system, you are going down. Thank you very much. Mr. U.S. Attorney.
Well, thank you, General Wilson, and thanks for everyone you recognized. And Mike Savage and Graham Billings in my office, I also wanted to recognize for their role in that. And you have to wonder if these people went across state borders to hide the scheme. You have to wonder that. But if that's your goal, we are going to work together to find you. And that's what we did in this case, and we will continue to do that. So I very much appreciate your strong relationship. We also work, obviously, very closely with Jeff Jackson, the Attorney General here in North Carolina, and have seen similar conduct in North Carolina that does not cross state borders. And Jeff, your team has worked so hard on that case, and I really appreciate it. And if you want to come up and give some more details on that, we'd appreciate it.
Thanks, sir. I'm here for 2 reasons. The first is to thank all of our partners in bringing this case. I think that you all get a sense of how difficult it can be to bring these cases, how many hours it takes to do the investigation work, and how many different agencies have to come together in order to make the case. In some cases, folks in different states. So one thing I need to be sure and do is say, there are more people here, there are more people who invested time into this than are represented here. And to everybody on my team who worked on this case for so long, I'm grateful to you. Our Medicaid Investigation Division has an excellent reputation for a reason. They personally talked to me about the strength of the partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the IRS, with DHHS, and with the FBI. We're really grateful. We have, at NCDOJ, a lot of resources, but we could not make this case on our own. If it weren't for the other agencies represented here, there would be a lack of accountability. This is something I've really come to appreciate as a relatively new Attorney General, how much we rely on our partners. We rely on them very heavily, which is why I'm proud to report those partnerships are very strong. This case is an excellent example of that. About this case involves Crystal Jackson. Here's basically what happened. She held herself out as a licensed provider of health care. She was not. She provided services to folks who were incarcerated or deceased, or at least claimed to. She then billed the state government on behalf of those services that were never provided. And we're talking about roughly $2 million that she stole from the people of North Carolina. We found out about this when our Medicaid Investigation Division did some forensic data work and saw some red flags, some very unusual billing practices. They then opened an investigation, had some very strong evidence, and then took that evidence to our law enforcement partners who helped us complete the investigation and then pursue enforcement. Here's what I want folks who provide Medicaid services to know, and this has been said by a couple of folks up here. We have never had more forensic tools for detecting fraud. You have to provide a lot of data to us if you are asking the taxpayer for money. With that data that you provide to us, we have new forensic tools to engage in the type of data mining that will spot your fraud. If you are committing fraud as a Medicaid provider, you have never been more vulnerable to exposure. We're going to find you. We have tools that have never been more powerful, and as you can see, we have a partnership that has never been more powerful. Grateful at everybody up here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Attorney General. You know, you say you rely on partnerships. We obviously rely on our partnership with you, so I very much appreciate it. We're happy to take questions. Any questions you have for anyone up here? We've got some experts in the room, too, so we'll do what we can. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Tina Jerry, WSOC TV. I'm the South Carolina Bureau reporter. Actually, I have a question for you, sir. I know we've done a lot of stories about the behavioral health crisis, not just in South Carolina, North Carolina, but just nationwide. So can you talk a little bit about how this type of fraud impacts that crisis and the people who sincerely need help in our communities?
That is a great question, amazing question. Obviously, mental health in any state, and I'm talking about my home state of South Carolina, I'm sure our friends up here in North Carolina could talk about it here, but there's a mental health crisis, and obviously there's a stigma attached to mental health, and trying to reach people who need that type of help is hard enough. Obviously, there's a lot of reforms South Carolina government can do to better provide mental health services to people out there, but the number one thing we can start doing is putting in place a robust investigative guardrails that would prevent the type of fraud that is going on, that's being perpetrated through the Medicaid program, especially exploiting mental health as people out there who are relying on the government funding like Medicaid to get mental health services that they so desperately need. As I said in my narrative a few moments ago, the Medicaid beneficiaries that were being defrauded, not just the people of South Carolina, but the beneficiaries who were being defrauded were children, nonverbal, autistic, quadriplegic, children with other severe mental health issues, and they were being exploited for allegedly for someone else's financial gain. And when you're out there trying to tell people who need mental health treatment, and you're trying to say that we are here to help you, you want to make sure that they're coming into a system that is safe and that has guardrails in place that will protect their personal information, has guardrails in place that will, when a parent is bringing their child in to get that kind of service, you want to ensure that the services that they are getting are protected services and that all of the money and all of the resources that are being funneled through this program are going to the people who desperately need it the most. That wasn't happening in this case because of the alleged conduct of these individuals. So First thing we got to do is we got to fix the system. We got to make sure that this fraud is rooted out and that there's a lot of sunlight and transparency on it. And then we got to start talking about mental health. That's a proactive measure. Having open conversations about people who struggle with depression and anxiety and multiple disorders, mental health disorders. And a lot of people out there, this is a little sidebar, I talk to friends all the time. I've talked to people in my life who've struggled with mental health issues. And I say, if you see a bone sticking out of your leg, you know to go to a doctor and get a cast put on it and get treated for that, injury. But sometimes you have not a physical bone, but a broken bone in your brain, something that can't be seen. And people somehow think it's different than a bone sticking out of your leg, and it's really not. And it can have even worse, after effects, people who don't get treated. So mental health is very important. We need to highlight it. We need to promote it. We need people to feel comfortable coming forward to have these conversations. And we need to make sure that these resources get to the people who need it the most, especially children. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, sir. I have a question for Mr. Barnacle, and this actually may apply to someone else, but you had mentioned this. You said that the federal government had a national coordinated takedown of Medicare fraudsters. Can anyone speak a little bit more to what that looks like?
Just on a top level, for the last 2 weeks, the federal government has committed resources to making arrests and rounding up offenders involved in healthcare fraud. I believe the numbers are a little over 400 people were arrested, and it's a significant dollar loss to the Medicare and Medicaid programs across the country.
And then my next question, just one more, this one for you, Attorney General Jackson. So you were, of course, a former congressman. Senator Tillis's retirement, he announced that retirement after expressing concern about the Big Beautiful Bill and its approach to waste, fraud, and abuse within Medicare. As you're standing on this stage, you're also working to fight against fraud, which is a concern across the country. Want to get your reaction to his retirement announcement and how I guess all of these things sort of work together in the greater goal.
Well, I respect that when he decided it was right for him and his family that he chose to step away. I also respect that he had some concerns about impacts for Medicaid in North Carolina. We're here to discuss Medicaid fraud. I think the common link is, and General Wilson spoke to this, how vulnerable this population is. We're talking about among the most vulnerable people and among the most vulnerable children in the state. In our capacity as law enforcement officials, we have no higher charge than to stand guard on behalf of those kids. Our ability to save taxpayers' money is really important, but really comes second to our obligation to defend the most vulnerable children in our state. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Rick Jensen with WBT Radio. I'm not sure who's supposed to answer this one, but you talked about over $22 million being paid out. Of that $22 million, were you able to freeze their accounts, and how much do you think you'll be able to give back?
Yeah, well, I'll start with that, and if anyone else wants to step in. There are asset forfeiture provisions in each indictment, which means we have to follow a judicial process, but we will seek to get all of that money back. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but we will have an effort, and that effort goes far longer than the criminal case. So we can find someone guilty, sentence them, put them in jail for whatever the sentence is. We will continue to try to recover that money for years to come until every dollar is recovered.
Was a lot of it still there?
That I don't know. I don't believe so. This was a very sophisticated and long-running scheme, and I think part of the scheme was hiding that money. So there was no money frozen at indictment like we always hope for, but we will be working across state lines to recover that money. Yes, ma'am.
For Attorney General Wilson, for the children in these cases, were they ever seen by the healthcare professionals at these fraudulent companies, and how are their families doing now knowing that their information?
It is my understanding that these children had their information stolen, and then claims were filed using their information because some of the co-conspirators had access to this information from their employment. And they were, and by the way, one thing I omitted from the narrative is that some of the co-conspirators were selling the information for what, $250 to $300 a pop. So they were selling the Medicaid beneficiary numbers of these children who had these severe disabilities, and they were selling them for $200, $300 to other co-conspirators so that they could then bill false claims on behalf of these children and then misdiagnose them. And these children and these families were completely unaware of this activity. Thank you for your question.
Hey, Wilson, can you
So I will do my best to answer give you the origin story, but I have our senior investigator here on the front row who I could bring up in just a second if I don't do a sufficient job. But my understanding is that members of our Medicaid Provider Fraud Unit in the Attorney General's office were seeing very suspicious activity in billing with Medicaid providers in South Carolina. We spotted this activity along with employees at the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and they started to see all of these people popping up, and it was very fraudulent. They started seeing them pop up across the border up here in North Carolina, and that is when we reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI to assist us in this cross-border scheme. Was that sufficient, or any color commentary you want to add to that?
No, that's sufficient.
Thank you, Jamie.
Can any of you speak to when any of these suspects will be in court? I know one of them is pled. I saw that in the paperwork, but date-wise, when will that start to happen?
It will be the coming days. I suspect it'll be this week. July 4th sometimes messes up the court schedule, and that's up to the judge's schedule, but we'll expect all of them to be making appearances in court in the coming days, and 2 of them will be pleading guilty in the coming days. And I wanted to add one thing. You know, the allegations are not only that they stole the beneficiary's number to make these claims, but a lot of these defendants stole the provider's information. They would issue job applications and get provider numbers and then use those provider numbers to make claims with fake beneficiaries and get the money. It's classic fraud. What else?
Sorry, yeah.
Brett.
I don't know if this is for Attorneys General Jackson or Wilson or both. I think you made reference to it being like she's been working on this 4 to 5 years. Like, how long has this program been going on, I guess, for each one of you?
Our office became aware of this going back to 2020. And again, that was us working with the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And at that time is when we reached out to our friends up here in North Carolina with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI.
And Attorney General Jackson, like you said, you saw some things that were like they know some of the people know some things, some irregularities that you mentioned. When was that first coming about? When did you first start? Did the people start noticing some things about not being maybe inaccurate or not up on the up and up?
Months, not years. His investigation went longer because it was more sophisticated, the crime involved was more sophisticated and had more bad actors than ours.
Any other questions for anybody? Well, thank you guys so much for covering this, for being here. We're happy, or at least I'm happy, and some of us may be happy. If you have any other questions on an individual basis you want to ask, we're happy to do interviews and answer those questions on or off the record. Is there anything else we can do for you? Leah Bontavani is here as our public information officer, so any follow-up or specifics you need, she's the lady for that. All right, thank you.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.